Everyone, welcome to another episode of Faces of Founders. Today we have Professor Lennox joining us. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
You're welcome, and thank you for asking me.
You're welcome. What is your connection to York, and how long have you been at York?
Well, my connection with York started with me, my years as an undergraduate. I came to the university, to Glendon College, which at that point was York University. There was no Keele campus in those days, in 1963, September of 1963. And I got my York University degree at Glendon as an English major. And at the time I came to York, the total undergraduate population was 500 people. And one of my classmates was one of your guests, Robert Drummond. Another classmate was my wife, Jane, and there were a great number of other people that we knew and have kept in touch with. And it was a wonderful, wonderful time to be a university student. And it was for me almost it was a perfect setting to get an undergraduate degree. And then I went away to do a master's degree at the University of Sherbrooke, came back, and I was asked to undertake work as a teaching assistant at York. And then before I knew it, I was a full-time faculty member. And that was on the Keele campus where I had all the years of my full-time teaching as a faculty member at York. And I came to Founders College, as I recall, about 1970.
Yeah, that's awesome. I still can't believe that number. We were mentioning a little bit before the interview, but can you believe like York had 500 students, and considering how much that it has now, that's mind-blowing. I wanted to ask you, when you went to Glendon, it wasn't like, did it have the French program, or was there specialization in French like it is now, or was just Glendon College just to go at any degree you wanted to complete?
You're quite correct. And after second year, when the Keele campus opened, the students in our cohort who were science students went to the Keele campus because that was where the labs were located.
Okay.
There was no French program. That came in 1967 when Glendon was officially sort of founded as a French specialist college at York.
Okay.
But you've got to remember that most of us started our first year university. Most Ontario high school graduates started first year university having completed 5 years of French in high school. So although it was not the French program did not exist, there were many of us that took French courses anyway, just as part of our elective choice.
Please tell us about some of your most memorable moments during your time as a dean.
Well, what I should say first of all is that the dean, at least in my experience, and I was dean of graduate studies for 6 years, the dean doesn't operate alone. He operates with a very dedicated and gifted group of colleagues. Mm-hmm. Members of the non-faculty staff, members of the faculty staff. And so the memorable moments I'm going to talk about were not mine alone, but I shared them with people who worked with me as a team. I very often was the spokesperson, but I was never by any means the smartest person in the room or the person who made important decisions alone, because all of these decisions were very collegial and very collaborative. So what do I remember of the work done, memorable moments within the Faculty of Graduate Studies? So I would say, first of all, there was the creation of new programs. And I remember 3 in particular, or maybe 4. The first one I remember was the establishment, when I was dean, of the master's program in critical studies in disability. And that was a very important process and result that we did in collaboration. Myself and my colleagues in the Faculty of Graduate Studies, along with a woman by the name of Marcia Ryu, who was a faculty member at York. That was a very important and one of the first recognitions that that critical disability studies was a topic that needed to have a graduate program. And that was when the first this of course was always for me. These programs always carried an element of education for me personally. And that was the first time I came across the phrase social determinants of health. And it was Marcia Ryu's emphasis on that in the process of getting this program ready for approval by the council that licenses such programs, the Ontario Council that licenses such programs, that I became aware of the importance of social determinants of health um, in the role or in relation to critical disability studies. That was a really, and she was a wonderfully dedicated individual, and York really profited from her dedication to this. The second one was the establishment of a program of Master of Science in Nursing, and that was another that we'd had a Bachelor of Science in Nursing, and then the people that ran that program, and as the program grew, began to think that graduate study of nursing was important, and so their dedication moved the process through so that it was eventually licensed. The one that really required, I would say, a special touch because it had been talked about and begun for years and years and years was a master's in humanities. And you would think that York, which has, for whom the humanities division is one of its signatures in terms of undergraduate education and also as it is potential for graduate education. The proposal for that particular master's degree had languished for years and years and years. And then Professor Bernie Lightman of the Department of History picked it up and was doggedly determined that this was going to be a success. And through his perseverance and his ability to sort of pull people together, that one became a graduate program. That was a terrific moment for me. And then the last one was the Executive Masters of Business Administration in the Schulich School of Business. Dean Horvath at the time was very excited by this idea and by a possible partnership with Northwestern University in the United States. And he worked on that and worked on that, and we worked with him, and the program was eventually licensed by the Ontario Council of Graduate Studies. So those, in terms of, let us say, offerings within the faculty, broadened what we could offer, but also were tremendously, they were in demand. They became almost instantly in demand. And that was a great thing. I would say through our very able executive officer, Michelle Young, who knew where all the money was buried, she was very, very empathetic towards students who were experiencing financial difficulty, and particularly international students. And there were cases that came up occasionally, not often, but occasionally, where international students found themselves in tremendous financial difficulty. And Michelle sort of walked the faculty through or found ways in which these students could be supported. And of course, in matters like this, and in many issues within the Faculty of Graduate Studies, the dean is always he's the figurehead to whom all of these good things are attributed. But as with the 4 graduate programs I've talked to you about, and in this case with the finding of aid for students, I mean, really, I was very much supportive, but it was the people within the faculty who made the difference, and that was tremendously satisfying. And I would say among the most memorable moments, but not among my favorite activities, were negotiations with the Canadian Union of Public Employees, the unit at York that is responsible for contracts with part-time faculty, teaching assistants, and so on. We always came to a positive resolution, but it was an intense and very very what's the word I want? Well, let's say it was a very intense process. But when we got to a successful result, again, in my role as dean, but also more importantly, as a member of the team, we always were able to get to a constructive result. But these are not what I'd call these are what I would call faculty memorable moments. In other words, as dean, I oversaw them, but the successes and the accomplishments were shared with a whole lot of people without whom there would have been no memorable moments at all. And that's what you've got to remember, that at York University, so much of what we did, and I expect it's still the case, even though I'm being retired for 10 years now. But I would say so much, it is so often the case that the university functions through with the aid of an enormous well of goodwill that people share together to try and make positive results emerge. So I enjoyed it. 6 years, it was good. I mean, I was very fortunate to have been asked to do this. I had wonderful colleagues to work with, so I just I felt very lucky.
Yeah, that's quite some big programs that you're talking about now that became established while you were there. But I definitely understand what you're saying. That's for sure a team effort, because what you have talked about, those definitely take an enormous amount of work and commitment and effort, and that can only be done with a team. So
Yeah, and you believe in something bigger than any one individual. Although within those initiatives, there are individuals who stand out and are kind of inspirational. And I used to draw a great deal of strength from that and a great deal of pleasure and admiration from it.
yeah, I can imagine for sure. That's great. Thank you for implementation of those programs along with all the people that helped you. A lot of students are taking those, some popular ones there.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's good. That's the end result.
yeah. What do you feel are the benefits and drawbacks of learning online versus learning in person?
Oh. Well, let's start with the benefits first of all. Um, if you are a mature student who has the nerve to undertake undergraduate or graduate study while you still have a family that depends on you, and perhaps if you still have children who are young or demands made on you, and you don't have the flexibility to carve out, let's say, 3 hours a week to attend classes, I think online learning can be tremendously facilitative. In
Mhm.
other words, there are things you can do that don't require so much, what's the word I want, adjustment of your own personal schedule and obligations. These are things that are more easily done if you can do them online. So I
Mhm.
think that is one advantage. I think another advantage, of course, is that in times like these, when we're in the midst of a plague or a pandemic, things things effectively would, in terms of learning, could stop cold without the online part. And I know people have lots to criticize about online learning, but at least it's there
Mm.
for people to take. And if they don't want to, they don't have to. Nobody puts a gun to somebody's head and says you're going to university and enjoy it. People make the choice. So they can't, people can choose online or not, but if it's the only game in town, then you either do it, you either educate it, or it stops formal education. So I think that's a very important advantage. I don't think, Catherine, for my part, not, but I must say, as a qualification, I've never taught online, and I'm very glad I never had to. Although I do understand, I hope I give some idea of what I think are the positives. I don't think anything can replace a group of people in a room talking about an idea, or talking about an author, or talking about a book. And you miss the simultaneity. In other words, you're in a room, there are a whole lot of people talking, and there is um, such an important part of it is related to the students and the instructors or the teachers' ability to read faces, to read body posture, to know when someone is sitting back and doesn't have something to say, but somebody's leaning forward in their chair and really has an opinion.
Mm.
Or, the dynamic of simply relating person to person at the moment, in the moment, and the dynamic that creates. So I really don't believe anything can replace in-person learning, but I do think there are in the there are, let us say, under certain circumstances, important other ways that you can learn if in fact you really want to. And of course, nothing will ever replace the dynamic of motivation. You can be as motivated or unmotivated online or in person. It depends on how much you want to learn, how ambitious you are for your own education, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I've heard teachers mention that about the body language. It's harder to read online. I know you said you never taught online, but like typically with the classes, a large majority of people they don't put their cameras on. So it's very the few people that do put them on, they have to, read the body language from them. And then again, it's only like maybe they're just their head or
Yes,
not proportionate.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's harder, and I've heard that a few times. So,
And I
um,
think humor is more difficult online than it
oh
is
yeah,
in person.
for sure, because you don't hear anyone laughing if it's,
No, and
yeah.
you can't read the faces to think, oh well, maybe some bit of humor here will help us sort of break the mood or something of that
Yeah.
kind. So, and I'm a great believer in humor. So that I don't think I don't think online would be quite probably. I don't think I'd be very effective online, probably.
Oh no. Yeah, humor in class is always great. It does lighten the mood, when it can get tense sometimes when you're doing academic related
Yes.
things. So that's a good strategy. Okay, what sorts of topics did your previous research focus on? If you still continue to do research, what does that focus on?
Well, my field, I was a faculty member in the Department of English, but my field was Canadian literature. And initially, it was the literature of English Canada and French Canada, sort of comparing the two. And I did for a year or two teach in the French department years ago. And I always taught courses in Canadian literature, but then my own research took me into the fields of biography and editing. So I collaborated with a colleague in writing the biography of a Canadian literary uh, journalist. And then I became interested in exchanges between writers. And so I edited correspondence between different Canadian writers. And became more and more interested in life writing, autobiography, biography, fictional autobiography, autobiographical fiction, that sort of thing. And I continued doing that, and I love doing that. But I must confess, I don't do it anymore.
Okay, that's okay.
Yeah, I don't. From the time of my retirement, I did one or two things after my retirement, but no, my research effectively came to a conclusion then.
Yeah, biographies are really fun to read. Do you have any examples of the ones that you did?
Yes, we did. Well, let's see. We did Gabriella Waugh's Sorrow and Enchantment. We did Margaret Lawrence's Dance on the Earth. We did Adele Wiseman's Old Woman at Play. We did Emily Carr, her
Oh wow, that's cool.
autobiographical books. We did the Diaries of Charles Ritchie, which were wonderful. Just sort of we picked and chose. Trying to think who else. John Glasgow's Memoirs of Montparnasse. We did some translations. Claire Martin in an Iron Glove. What we did within the English department is we studied. If we were doing works from French Canada, we did those in translation. We didn't do them in the original, but we endeavored to the extent that we could to include works from both language groups, both English and French, in Canada. And of course, they're always so interesting because although our impulse is to accept them as truth, primarily either biography or autobiography use the same tools as fiction. And so point of view and what is accurate, what is authentic, what is
Mm.
what has been imagined, also metaphors writers use. It's just quite fascinating. So I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Yeah, that is very fascinating. What advice would you give to students who want to succeed but also want to maintain work life school balance?
I've thought about that one. Um, I know that there are students for whom working is the only way that they can continue their education, and yet they have personal lives as well. So I think that first of all, you have to be sure that you are able to go at each of the components of your life with roughly the same kind of energy and hopefully the same kind of pleasure. So one thing that people do more and more, I think, and that seems to be a factor in aiming for balance is that they'll take more than 4 years to complete an undergraduate degree, right? They may have small children, they may have other obligations, they have their employment, but also they want to have time to enjoy the lives that they lead. So I think that's one thing. And I don't know I don't think it's a terrible thing at all. I think probably in many cases it's very constructive. It was different. I mean, I have to remember too that I'm the product of a generation that by and large got the degree in 4 years. That
Mm.
an honors degree, as we called it, in 4 years, and you got a general degree in three. And it was unusual to take more time than that. Very often, people who did it failed some subjects on the way up. I don't know and I think there probably are students who are able to do that still, but I don't know to what extent they're the majority or the minority. But I do think that you need to be kind to yourself, not indulgent, but I think you need to be kind to yourself to make sure that when you go around this mulberry bush we call an undergraduate education, that you do it in such a way that you can enjoy it. And I think surely one of the ways to enjoy it is to create for yourself the time to be able to do the job properly and to enjoy what you're doing. Don't enjoy everything, I'm aware of that, but you try to enjoy as much of it as possible. However, you've also got to realize that sometimes when the crunch comes, there is no work life school balance, that you have to focus your energies on a particular task for a particular length of time. And somebody might say, oh, this essay, I'm having trouble with the essay and I want to go out and I want to do this, that, and the other. But surely you have to realize as a grown up that sometimes that's not possible. And you've got to take the time it requires for you to do the job you want to do and the job that your teachers are expecting of you, because you'll never be able to do this again. You only go through this once for most people. There are others who come back in the later years, but by and large, I think you've got to do it in such a way that you are able to give the education the attention it deserves, and that you're able to give yourself the time to enjoy it. I can remember the case of a student in one of my classes who I think was probably, I don't know, maybe she was 65, maybe she was 70. And she came from a large family and she had always wanted to go to university. But when she was of university age, it was the Great Depression. This was
Mm.
in the 30s. And her brothers, I think, went to university because they were male, and that was the custom in those days. But she didn't. She got married fairly young and had her children when she was young. And she sort of made her peace with that and raised them, and I think enjoyed it. But when the time came that her children were grown and that she had time to herself, she decided, well, this is my time and I've always wanted a university education, so I'm going to go back to school at this ripe age of 60 or 65 or 70. And Margaret sat right in the front row of every lecture. And oftentimes I would just lecture to her because she was enjoying it so much. Pleasure is irresistible, just irresistible. I used to just get such a kick out of watching how much she just took it in like a sponge, and she'd stay after class and discuss, she'd say, well, I don't agree with this idea, but I thought this one, this is worth considering. But she really enjoyed it. And she had sort of delayed her education for, what would it be, 40 years, 50 years? But when her turn came, by God, she was going to make it count. That was really quite a delight to see.
That's a great story. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
And I used to have another student, wonderful woman, who came when her children were still young, and they'd emigrated here from elsewhere. And her problem was that she didn't have a sitter for her youngest child sometimes. And she'd say, I'm so embarrassed, she said, but would you ever think of letting me come to class with my son? And she said, he's got coloring books. He just sits by himself very quietly and does his work. And I said, of course. And that kid would come and he'd do exactly what his mother said. He was quiet, and she was able to attend class and so on. I thought I really admired her because she was so anxious for her education. That was a great privilege, actually. Both those women were wonderful. And then I taught a course once to a group of women I don't know, let's say 20, 25 women. The youngest was probably 18, but there were three of them in that class that didn't pay tuition because they were over 65. They were a terrific group of people. Top of the material. They talk to each other. They, say, I don't agree with this. And then they say, you may not remember this young man, but that sort of thing. That was also great fun. So education, I think the secret to it is to enjoy it and to give yourself the time to enjoy it. That's the
Yeah.
most important thing. Enjoy it. There's hard work, there's slogging. There's sometimes when you think, oh, I could care less, but really nothing's perfect. But the enjoyment is the closest you'll come to, I don't know, just a pleasure of learning.
Thank you for sharing those stories. Those were very interesting. And the unifying question is, so this would have been back when you were still doing your research. What inspired you to study the subject field that you have chosen?
Um, Teachers, I would say primarily. I mean, it was my own background. I was always aware, I think, that the experience. I don't quite know how to put this. Um, we used to have a census that came around. I guess it was every 10 years, and the census takers would come to the house, to people's houses to take the census. And one of the questions was, what is your origin?
Mhm.
And I remember my mother's answer to that was Canadian. No, madam, no, no. What what group to what group do you belong? And mother would say to Canadian group. And they'd say, well, I mean, what do you mean by that? And mother said, I was born and raised in this country. She said, I am Canadian. I think probably that's the only way I can answer the question. And I I kind of admired that actually. And I sort of had an idea, well, being Canadian is something unique in itself. And I remember reading a passage from Hugh McLennan's. And this was when I don't know how old I was. Maybe I was 8, maybe I was 10, 12, oh, probably 12 or 13. They had a Book of the Month Club. And one of the books that came into the Book of the Month Club to our house, and my parents subscribed to Book of the Month like pretty well every other set of parents in Canada in those days, maybe North America, was Hugh McLennan's Two Solitudes, which was a very important work in sort of the evolution of Canadian literature. And there's one passage I remember reading, and it was the description of a scarlet maple in the fall shedding its leaves. And I thought to myself, I recognize this. I've seen this. And I think the seed was planted then. And then when I was in high school, there were teachers that made me realize that literature was what I loved. But when I came to Glendon, it was two people in particular that sort of set my direction. And one of them, the most important of them, was a woman by the name of Clara Thomas, who became a very famous Canadian biographer and critic. And I admired her immensely, and she was terrifically encouraging. And the other one was a member of the French department, a man by the name of Jacques Cottenham, from whom I took a course in littérature canadienne française. And those two people really set me on my way. I think I found their teaching very congenial. I thought they were, as people, tremendous people. And I recognized them as Canadian. And I thought to myself, I think maybe this is where I would like to. Um, this is the field in which I would like to work. And they were university people. And I thought, oh, well, that's an idea above my station, thinking you could do something in university. But then I found myself just sort of moving on. After undergraduate, I did my master's degree, and then I got employment at York, and then I left for 2 years to get to go to do my PhD, and it just sort of grew. But if it wasn't for those teachers, I don't know that I would have become professionally the person and professionally, professionally the person I did become. Teachers are tremendously powerful figures in the lives of a young person. And I was very, very lucky in meeting those two people. And then Clara taught us, of course, they never left York, and Clara became a very close colleague and collaborator and friend. She and her family we became very close. And Jacques, I always would see, he was a founder's fellow, so we would spend time together. And as people, they were no different from what they were as academics. And that was a very authentic correspondence for me that was extremely, extremely important. And they loved what they did. They loved books. They loved talking about books. I mean, what more could an undergraduate student ask for?
Yeah.
Just being tremendously lucky.
And
So
that's spectacular that you got to keep in touch with them and that you became very close.
now that was a real privilege,
Yeah.
a very great privilege that I always treasured, always.
Fantastic. That's a really amazing story. And I always find it interesting to hear what like people have talked about in the show in the past, but certain things that have inspired them for different things. Like no matter who it is, I always find that interesting, like what made somebody do something. I always,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. No, you're quite right. I thoroughly agree.
You shared a lot. Thank you so much, and for all you've done at York and advancing certain programs and sharing your experiences. So we really appreciate having you on, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Well, it's always been a team effort, and I've always felt very lucky to be part of whatever team I've worked with. So, Catherine, I do thank you for asking me. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. I think this work that you're doing really is very, very impressive.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I mean it. Okay, good.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Bye bye.
Bye bye.